Phillip knows from the start that it will take more than one Grimwalker to see his vision through to completion. The process of creating the things is frustratingly imperfect, involving more trial and error than he cares for. He knows, as well, that no devilish copy could ever truly replace what has been forever lost to him. Still, a part of him hopes that he will only have to undergo the process once, that the creature he brings into this dreadful world will work exactly as intended, that it will, somehow, impossibly, be him. He could never be so lucky. The first is Abel. Adam doesn't occur to him until later, ironically, who never quite makes it out of the ground. His pale hands grasp for Phillip, reaching, his unnatural pink eyes pleading. But he is only a first attempt. His components not quite right, and his stolen lungs seize before he can cry for help. Benjamin comes next, complete enough to make it a few months before his Goldstone heart malfunctions, and he dies in Phillip's arms, his sweet face contorted in pain. Then there is David. He skips C, that harsh consonant that makes his chest ache, which has been stolen by the hellish, shadowy creature with whom Phillip has made a pact, like something out of a wretched fairy tale. He does quite well. For 3 years he survives, serving, loyal, loving, until he asks if they are truly brothers, and Phillip's hand slips. Each one is different, from their source material and from each other, in ways that range from barely perceptible to blatantly obvious. They look alike, but not identical, siblings or even cousins rather than twins. Some are more strong, or more intelligent, or more shy. None of them are him. Phillip becomes quite good at making them, though, and thankfully names are not in short supply. When he cannot bring one immediately to mind, it is easy enough to thumb through the tattered little pocket Bible he has kept with him all this time, more out of sentimentality than need, or even belief, and pluck one from its pages. Ezekiel, Felix, Goliath. He draws from every part of the good book. Some of the names are quite fitting, noble, heroic names to fit the sort of man he needs at his side, and some are not. Some are a sort of joke, just for his own amusement. The collector pretends to find them amusing too, or perhaps he finds them genuinely funny, regardless of context. The monster that Phillip has made a false pact with is frustrating and entertaining in turns. The Star Child's petulance could drive him to violence on bad days, but there is undoubtedly a charm to his youthful presence. All his talk of games makes Phillip nostalgic for his own childhood, rough and cold as it so often was, for the hours spent rambling together through the woods and giggling beneath quilts when they were meant to be asleep. He longs to go back. He must move forward.
I don't know why you bother to name them all,
the collector muses, draped across the mantle of Phillip's current ill-begot cabin like a living trophy.
There's so many, and you go through them so fast. You should just give them numbers.
Phillip says conversationally that he prefers names, as he frees yet another rib from its cage with a satisfying snap. It gives them a bit of personality. Never the right one, though. By Isaac, he's sure that he's perfected the process, at least so far as appearance. The creature he pulls from the ground this time is so nearly perfect, so much like him, that with his eyes still closed and his hair overgrown, Phillip could swear that he is holding a memory in his arms. The resemblance makes his breath catch, a shock he somehow isn't expecting after all this time. The inevitable disappointment is twice as bitter when the boy opens his eyes, ruby red in the dim light, revealing himself to be just as much a devil as the rest. On second glance, his jaw is a bit crooked. It is more so by the time his tenure as the Golden Guard is up. Levi chokes to death on smoke amid a riot. Nathaniel is poisoned before he hits his stride. Thomas has an unfortunate fall. Uriel is the last to call him by his true name, before he must change it to avoid being run out of town. While it saddens him to leave that part of himself behind, it is for the best. Phillip never sounded quite right on any of those creatures' lips anyway.
You're gonna run out of water soon!
The collector teases over his shoulder, always lurking and looking on in a most irritating fashion. He will simply start again from the beginning, Phillip explains. He had hoped he wouldn't have to do that, at least, that one of these creatures could serve their purpose longer than a few short years. But each one has ultimately strayed or fallen victim to the many dangers of this dreadful place. What is wrong with them all? Where is the fatal flaw so that he may correct it? Loyal Samuel was the most successful so far, perfectly trusting and steadfast in his service for a full decade before suffering a wound that even the wretched witch healers could not close in time. He exited this wicked world, still singing his beloved brother's praises. Phillip is getting older. His Grimwalkers can no longer pass as siblings of his, and so he has become an uncle. He has found it to be a blessing in disguise, the new role a much better fit for the purpose of teaching and guiding. It's about time he took a more parental approach to his creations. The collector's giggle rings off stone walls and dances along bone beams as he circles the room, pulling Phillip from his thoughts.
Hope you don't have to make up another W!
The childish voice mocks.
Those are hard!
Phillip grits his teeth. He's right, the heathen. His trusty holy book is frustratingly devoid of any names, starting with that particular letter. He will manage, he says, sternly, then asks the collector to take his leave. He knows how his presence overwhelms the new ones. The collector pouts and whines, but does as he's told. That is the saving grace of such a monstrous thing, his naive and childish obedience. The Grimwalkers, likewise, are easier to control when they're young. He's avoided making them too mature lately. They start to ask too many questions after a certain point, or worse, develop rebellious ideas and sinful desires. Better to have a young mind to mold right now from the start and avoid any trouble. This newest one should be about 14 by his estimation. Not ideal, but he has an important presentation coming up, and he needs his Golden Guard to at least look as imposing as an adolescent can manage. Left alone in blessed silence, Phillip readies himself to grab onto the hand that will soon burst from the earth beneath his feet, to welcome his nephew Zachary into the world. Eventually, he must branch out. He is on track to rule the Boiling Isles within a few years, and he has bigger things to worry about than which silly little names to give his bespoke servants. He has created more Grimwalkers than he ever expected to need, and while he is still fond of biblical names, it is easier to avoid repetition if he draws from a larger pool. He still names them in alphabetical order, though, for simplicity. Virtue names do rather nicely, reminding him a little of home. These, too, rarely fit the boys they are attached to, remaining merely aspirational. Merit is a clever little thing, until he becomes too smart for his own good. Ransom is somber, but reliable, perhaps the best yet at carrying out assassinations. He dabbles in the most Puritan of naming conventions too, for a laugh. Woe to me, all of you sinners, is discomfortingly quiet, and slow to learn, but he lasts a good 5 years before a particular stretch of incompetence causes Lord Belos to lose his temper. Each Grimwalker is an experiment of sorts, an opportunity to improve upon all those that came before. With each iteration, he gains more insight into what inevitably leads them down the path to ruin. He fears it may be something intrinsic to them all, that the bones themselves contain something that turns them all against him in one way or another. Is it his brother, striking out at him from beyond the grave? No, he was never so spiteful. If anything, it is a passively inherited trait. The same way each copy bears his face, each one too carries a facet of his character, his warmth, his sense of humour, his endless well of love, but also his treachery. With so many years behind him now, the up-and-coming Lord of the Isles can reflect upon that part of his life with some detachment. His blood no longer sings with the desire to rip and tear and destroy each time he thinks of his brother's soul ensnared. His heart no longer wails in anguish at the loss, only beats along, steady and even in its deep-set pain. Now he can view each Grimwalker in a new light. They are his experiments, his works in progress, each one a stepping stone on the path to crafting the most true and perfect living memorial to his beloved brother. They are his nephews, every one of them, and he takes the responsibility of their education and training quite seriously. It is a critical part of the experiment to tease out which attentions they respond best to determine what form of discipline makes the most impact. Should they be praised, given special treatment, so that they love him unconditionally? Should they be left cold and wanting, desperate to get into his good graces? He has the luxury of trying out a slightly different approach with each one. If things go poorly, he's able to correct the course on his next attempt. All of them, regardless of how much of the personality he most longs to see spring to life again shines through, are easy to manipulate. So was his brother, he supposes. By the third time he must revisit the start of the alphabet, he is emperor. He has an iron grip on the boiling isles, a populace that has finally stopped asking questions and seen fit to adore him, and a pit full of shattered masks and crumbling bones. It would be far too easy to lose count if he hadn't named them all. He thinks of them as he crosses the long stone bridge suspended above that dark crevice, remembering his fallen guards in moments and phrases, like the many days that stretch behind him. They are each their own, the Grimwalkers, and yet they are one, an unending chain of nearly matching faces and voices and affection and betrayal. He does not miss them. Whichever one sprouts up to fill the void left by the former is enough to occupy whatever wisps of emotion he feels towards them as a whole. It hurts when they leave him, when they fail, but then there is always another taking up arms at his side, and if he simply blinks his eyes, it is as if it has been the same creature all along. Still, the pain of betrayal remains. He may not mourn them, but the things that bear his brother's face inspire anger in him that burns long after they have ceased to be. More than once he has been tempted to draw a new Grimwalker from the ground for the sole purpose of strangling it in punishment for the crimes of its predecessor. Only once has he succumbed to that temptation. He does not have the luxury of such extravagance now. To say nothing of his limited autet supply, palistrum wood is harder to come by now than it once was, and the herds of Selkidamus that used to roam the boiling seas have thinned significantly. He feels, as he so often does, as though the Isles themselves are conspiring against him, pulling the necessary materials from his reach. The predicted shortages of palindrome wood, in particular, are troubling. Even more than a functional Grimwalker, he requires a steady supply of palisman to carry on. The Emperor cannot fall apart into a screaming mass of sludge in front of his people. Only whatever face hides behind the mask of the Golden Guard is privy to seeing him in such a state. In recent years, it has become a larger part of the role, seeing after him, caring for him. Where once his Grimwalkers had brought him coffee in the morning and combed his hair out at night in concert with their military duties, now they must also gather up palisman from the reserves when his hands start to shake, and talk him down from his animal rage, if they dare. It's a good thing he has become so skilled at crafting them, otherwise they might not be able to keep up with the added responsibility. And now he must make yet another. What a bother. The most recent failure was Gabriel, who grew to be far less angelic than his namesake. His particular flavour of betrayal stings more than some. The thought of his Grimwalker cavorting with one of those soulless witches, planning a life outside of the castle, makes Belos see red. He would have snapped the neck of the witch in question too, if stubborn Gabe hadn't taken the secret of their identity to his grave. Belos has grown tired of naming his creations. He has not heard his own name spoken by anyone but the Collector in decades, and it weighs on him. If he were weaker, if he weren't inclined to adhere so strictly to his self-imposed requirements on the nature of naming Grimwalkers, he might consider bestowing his own name upon the next one, just to have an excuse to speak it aloud. But no, the next one must begin with an H. He muses on the letter as he goes about his day, attending meetings and arranging a Spartan funeral service for the Golden Guard, tragically taken in the night by a rare and incurable disease. He has already used Hiram and Honor. He does not especially like the sound of Herod or Hail. His pocket Bible all but disintegrated several years ago, but even if he had access to its pages, he's sure he would not find anything fitting his sensibilities. Have his tastes changed? Regardless, he will very soon be in need of a name. Any day now the soil will stir, the earth will crack, and he will be there to receive his latest creation. He hopes, genuinely, that this will be the last. It is by a stroke of luck, or fate, perhaps this is God's plan after all, that as he prepares to leave the throne room and retire to his personal chambers for the evening, a meek and well-meaning scout edges into his line of sight. Encouraged by her fellows, she presents the Emperor with an intriguing find, a book from the human realm, found washed up on the shore with a slew of other garbage and brought straight to the castle for review. Word of the Emperor's interest in human literature has gotten around, it seems. The waterlogged cover reads, "The Big Book of Baby Names." The thick tome is still damp when he takes it in hand, and clearly missing pages. As he thumbs carefully through it, he finds that it is, in fact, full of names, both comfortingly familiar and alarmingly strange. Listed alphabetically, divided by gender, it is a glorious testament to the continued propagation of humanity. It is exactly what he needs. Inside his chambers, he reads the sad, lumpy book from cover to cover, skimming the girls' names and scrutinizing the boys' ones. He finds his own among the thousands, and his brother's, and it sends a bittersweet pang through him to see that both names are still in use. It's good to know that when he returns to his own realm, he won't seem entirely foreign to the people he is now centuries removed from. Other names are puzzling, bizarre variations on ones he grew up hearing, the spelling highly questionable, while others have the distinct ring of different lands, so different from what he's used to that they might as well be demonic in origin. He flips to the section for H and reviews his options. Glancing over the familiar shapes of Henry and Hugh leaves him wondering if, perhaps, it would be wise to choose something more modern. It won't be long before the eclipse, just a few scant years until he can finally go home, and he would like the option to bring a Grimwalker back with him on that momentous journey. It would be convenient if that particular Grimwalker wore a name that his fellow humans responded well to. One name stands out to him, so deliciously ironic that if he did not know better, he'd suspect he imagined it. It brings a smile to his face to read it, to say it aloud. The collector, he's sure, will find it just as hilarious. Hunter. Yes, that one will do nicely.